All right, lots of videos out there on what to look for when you're buying a used car, but Kevin just bought this forklift and spent more on it than
I did my last car.
and my car put together, the Saturn.
Yeah, your car didn't up the ante a whole lot.
Anyway, what to look for when you're buying a used forklift. Here we go. All right, Kevin, what's going on with the forklift?
What's going on? Well, so I was in the market for a forklift. Was using the skid steer for everything, and it was getting a little sketchy, holding things up, crawling out of the thing. And I thought, well, let's get a little safer and actually get a forklift. So we started looking, and of course we started with cheap forklifts, like what Rich has at his property.
Yep.
And then we ended up with this one. So quite a bit more money, but I wanted something that would lift at least 6,000 pounds. I looked at an 8,000, but it was physically bigger, and I wanted it to be a little bit handy yet. I wanted it to have the pneumatic tires on it. It's gonna be living its life outside a lot on the driveway and stuff. Those tiny little tires, yeah, they're good on pavement and concrete, but that's about it. And then when I got looking, I found that I could get one with a diesel engine. So then that was awesome. It's like my barbecue. Every time I run out of propane, my spare tanks are all empty too. So I'm like, well, that's gonna be the exact same thing with the forklift. So as soon as you need it, get it real. And I have diesel on the farm, so diesel just made sense.
So you bought this from friends, so yeah. We're not worried about trying to find everything that's wrong with it, but there is a lot of things to consider when you're buying a forklift. One, what is it being used for, and making sure that it fits your needs. So tires, even people don't think you need mark-free tires on it, right?
Right.
Because
the other one I was looking at had the mark-free tires on it, but that to me, I don't care.
My forklift, smaller tires, soon as there's like snow, you just sit there and spin, you're stuck.
Right. This one's got a little bit better ground clearance, right, for going over some bumps. I kind of want side shift. Fork positioners would have been really cool, but this one doesn't have it, so that was not on the had-to-have list, obviously. I was looking at any forklift. Toyota's got a good name. I think so does Heister, and Yale are pretty popular, and there's some other ones too. But yeah, I don't really know what's the best out there. Like, what's the John Deere of forklifts? I have no idea.
That could come down to who is your closest dealer and where can you get parts, because that is important. We've got Toyota in Hamilton, serial number and whatever, you've got parts the next day. If you're buying one that is going to be harder to get parts for, the older that it is, keep that in mind too, right?
So where I bought it from, they wheel and deal used stuff, and they had 3 or 4 Toyotas sitting there, so they seem to like them. They're like, oh yeah, they're awesome forklifts, so I took their word for it that they're awesome forklifts.
And they're the salesman, so they're not biased at all. When you are looking at a forklift, first thing, obviously, compare prices as to what you're getting and what is comparative in that market. If you go to 5 years or newer, if you're into that kind of market, you're probably better off to just buy new anyway. So we're looking into 5 years or older and trying to figure out what it's been used for before, to make sure that it's still up to par. So first thing, physical appearance. If it's beat to crap or the paint is really faded, then you know it's been used outside. If it's been inside a factory, you know that it's wore out because they use it all day, every day.
So that being said, most of the forklifts I looked on online, 90% of them have been repainted.
And this one's been repainted too. I'm pretty sure this one's been
painted too.
This is banged up and not rusty or anything showing. So this one's been repainted already. So that, anything being repainted, you have no idea what's underneath. Yeah, so you're doing your best guess. Not that you're worried about things rusting through. It's the what kind of care it had before, right? Forklift should have some sort of maintenance record. At the bare minimum, it should have a safety record of being safetied annually. Is it annually or biannually? Anyway, there should be a record of it being inspected by a qualified person to make sure that it's still safe. And on top of that, maintenance records as to how many oil changes and how many services and what's been repaired on it over the course of its life. Once you've established that, start looking for stuff that's going to be expensive, right?
Right. So this one has just over 2,000 hours on it, which is very rare for something that's 10 years old, because if they're running in any sort of a warehouse, right, they're putting close to 2,000 hours a year on. So
okay. Now on a newer forklift, you can also have different hour meters on it. Generally, when the key is on, the hour meter's ticking. Some also count seat time, so it doesn't add up hours unless somebody's in the seat.
If you're sitting in the seat doing paperwork, or you're taking
Well, no, I'm talking about idle hours. If there's a lot of getting off and people leave it idling, that's hours that the fork, the mast steering is not actually getting used. There's also triggers on the throttle, like how much has it been off idle. Just because it has 2,000 hours on it doesn't necessarily mean that it's 2,000 hours of it being used as a forklift. So the only thing that would get wear is the engine, not the transmission, the mast, the forks, the hoses, all of that stuff. Next thing, once you figure out the hours and the amount of wear, the most amount of wear is on the mast and the forks. What happens is the bottom of the forks wear down because you're dragging them on the ground as you're picking up a skid. The heel is the most crucial part of the fork. So if you measure the width here, which is not a wearing part, making sure that the heel and the bottom at the back is roughly the same thickness as the forks themselves. If not, it's a safety thing where if you get inspected, that's one of the first things they're gonna do, and that equals a fine. Here on the farm, it doesn't really matter. Nobody gets inspected and he's the only operator, right?
And there might be some holes going in these tines shortly.
Yeah, as far as I know, it might be different in different regions. You can't torch a hole in the fork. That weakens the fork, even if you put it on the end. But if you drill a hole, that is legal. No?
Even a drilled hole.
It's not legal?
No, because you're altering the, right? These things are engineered to carry so much. As soon as you take some metal out of the tip, now you've put a hole in, right? Now you've weakened that tip, and the tip could break off, right? So
right.
no holes.
No holes.
Pass the safety.
Okay, that's. You guys can comment down below as I thought you could drill and not torch.
I haven't seen one yet on a farm that does not have a hole in it.
First thing I did. I gotta move wagons. So right after that, definitely check out the mast, hoses. Or clear sign, and it's a little weather cracked, little soft. That might come and nip you eventually. You want to check out the chains. If it only ever went, say, to the height of a truck because it unloaded a truck and loaded, then the mast isn't going to show anywhere, but your chains are never going to get used either. So you could have seized links if they didn't lubricate it properly.
Yeah, these. So this is the first stage chain. They're fine. These second stage chains here, you look at them, they're in a few spots here, you can see they're a little bit stuck.
So you can see how the chains are going straight, and then this one's a little bit crooked, meaning that this one is tight. And that happens when you don't constantly use that chain by putting it in the second and the third stage, or they're not lubricating it enough. You also want to check out these wheels, make sure that they're not spread out, and that these chains, which get all the work, the links that go on the pulley at the, say, between 3 feet and lower, aren't completely worn out because they do all the work constantly. A good indication of that is to make sure that the chain's not stretched at all, that you don't see shiny steel where it's actually so sloppy that it's moving back and forth. That probably see on my forklift. and that the length of the chain here, the gap between the links, is no more on a highly used part compared to a part that doesn't get used as much going around the rollers.
So the cylinders on this one have some pitting on them, especially on the main one here. You can see it's quite pitted and rusted. So I did know that before I bought it, and the price did reflect that. They don't leak though, because the cylinders, they're only oil on the bottom. So as long as your piston seals are doing their job, you're not gonna have oil leaking out of here because there's no oil on the top. And that is part of the reason why they pit, because they're not getting in oil when they go to get, they're always dry. Someday they will leak and we'll have to fix them.
Which is not the end of the world. There is lots of companies that rebuild the cylinders.
Well, you can get them re-chromed too. These hoses here, you can see they're in rough shape, but that's for the side shift. So it's not like they're gonna blow and everything's gonna come falling down. So we can live with those for another
decade.
Decade? I don't know. A little while.
Let's be honest. Another really expensive thing on the forklifts, we used to service the ones for local businesses, and that is the steering. That can add up real fast, $3,000–4,000 in steering, drag links, and tie rod ends, and that goes very quick. So back here, a good sign is grease hanging off of everything. That shows that they actually took care of it, that it was on a regular maintenance schedule. Jacking up the forklift and wiggling the tires, making sure that these bushings are not worn. So this is a pin called your king pin that holds your tire on. That has to be tight. Without the forklift running, just do the steering wheel jiggle, and make sure that, like, you see a little bit of play here and then a little bit of play. This one's not, this one's fine. And then any other ones that are all along. The problem is when you have 4 or 5 steering joints that are all connected and they all have a tiny bit of wear, then you start doing this. Inspectors don't like that, but again, perfect unit for something like this because you're only using it, say, 20 hours a year just for when you need to unload and load things, right? Also want to check out your pivot back here. You don't want that falling over, so your back axle is able to go with the contour of the ground. Jack it up so there's no weight on it, and then pry bars and jacks just to make sure there's no play. The exact same play that you would see here on this pin, it's just the other pin is this way and it rotates the axle. Tires are a huge thing as well. You'll see a pile of tires with the split ring called the Widowmakers. So don't attempt to try and repair your own tire unless you know exactly what you're doing. They're called Widowmakers for a reason. And that's because one ring holds in another ring, and if they don't lock properly, it becomes kind of a bomb. So
when you blow it up, they take out arms, legs, heads.
Yeah, if they don't do that, the explosion's loud enough to do some head damage too. And we've seen a guy in town do with that actually. A forklift is basically a triangle. You've got 2 front tires that are solid and then a pivot at the back. And the higher that your mast goes, the smaller that triangle gets and the more tippy your machine is. So this has an SAS system?
Yeah, so I did a little research on that, 'cause I'm like, what is that? So it's a stability
actuator system.
Assist system or something, I don't know.
Assist system.
Maybe. Anyway, so it has sensors in it, so if it starts to go a little off level or off center, then it'll lock this. There's a cylinder down here that'll lock your pivot. So instead of being a triangle, now you're in a square.
We don't know how to test that, if that works or not. Maybe run into the top with a loader tractor and tip it over and see if that thing actually locks up or not. But something to look into when you're buying.
And the other thing it does is if you are tipping your forks forward, because that changes your load, especially if you're high, it slows down. If it senses you're not level, it'll slow down the rate at what you can tip your forks.
And that's specific to certain forklifts, and I'm sure that implemented after
most
years.
of the newer Toyotas have it on there. So that's just another great electrical nightmare that will probably haunt me in 5 years. So.
Yeah, this one also has a button that puts the mast level in case you're carrying water.
Yeah, so if you're tipping it forward, you press that button and it'll stop level.
Okay.
Taking my whole forklift apart here.
Yep.
That's pretty simple.
Yeah. Other than that, if you look at what to look for when you're buying a used diesel, make sure there's no smoke coming out of the exhaust when it's warm, funny noises, and
Knocks and misses.
Knocks, misses, and leaks, and that's about it.
Yeah, so this is a good old, just a plain Jane diesel mechanical pump. No fancy electronics, no fancy emissions, no EGR. Just the way we like it.
Just the way we like it.
It's easy to service, air filter, fuel filter, and the oil filter is pretty handy to get at right here. I've changed oil on forklifts before, which is kind of like some of these skid steers where you gotta crawl halfway in and be up to your shoulder to get the filter on and off. What a pain.
The only catch can for the oil is like a cooking sheet to catch the oil because it's so low. But that depends on what forklift you have. You got higher carb things.
Hydraulic oil, so transmission oil.
So transmission, make sure that it smells good, that it's up to level, keeping in mind that it's automatic, so you want to check that while it's running. Radiator, make sure that it's not all rotten, that all the fins are nice and straight. Air filter, make sure that they're not super dusty. If it's in a plant that does whatever, then it's been in really tough working conditions. Make sure that the air filter is clean and maintained properly.
So this one had a new filter in it, so I have no idea what the real one looked
like. The engine of the drivetrain is probably as expensive to fix as any other parts on a forklift, right?
One trick somebody told me is grab the side shift lever and see how much plays in it, and then check that against the other ones.
Right.
Because this one is going to be like used all the time, and this one second, and this one rarely.
Right.
So if this one has the same play as these, then you can say, well, this doesn't have a whole lot of wear in that linkage, and you can see it doesn't. So that 2,000 hours is probably honest.
Yeah.
If it had 20,000 hours on it, this would be pretty sloppy.
Right. And then one last thing is brakes, and the really no spongy pedal. anything like that, move it and slam on the brakes, make sure they work. Parking brake as well. Probably the most neglected one that seizes up and whatnot, especially in our climates or whatever condition it's in.
But if it's on coming somewhere where you're where they're off and on a lot, the parking brake could be used quite a bit.
Right, if it was a good operator, yeah. It was one of those things that I'll be right back.
And if you're safety, you need the lights and the rear backup alarm, which is likely going to be unhooked here shortly.
All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed that video. You learned something new. If Kevin and I got stuff wrong or we missed something, definitely comment down below. Share your expertise. We don't drive them all day, every day. We just worked on them here and there and thought we'd share our knowledge. So comment what you want to see and I'll try and convince Kevin to buy it so we can make a video on it.
Because Rich wants more stuff around his yard for another year and a half.
Look at this. Look at this interrogator. It's in the shop. Everything's unhooked. Crane's coming Thursday. So now it's an actual contest to see whether he gets that done or I get the C10 drive. And if I can drive the C10 into the driveway, he owes me a case of beer. And it doesn't have to be on the road and finished. I just got to drive it here.
What?
Yeah.
Has to be finished. Mine's gonna be
It's not finished. If I can drive it to your house, it's finished enough.
So if I can drive that thing home with the airbox on, it's finished?
No, it has to. Okay, if the booms open up and everything's hooked up, then it works. That's good enough.
Well, then your tow rig has to work.
Yeah. No, my tow rig doesn't have to work. It just has to run and drive. Anyway, check out the interrogator video. Will be coming up soon. And check out the C10 build. It's 64 C10 on the other channel. So here we go.